Welcome to the West Ham Voice on a Sunday evening. I hope you're all doing well. Um, I'd like to introduce you to a man called Simon Rolfes. Now, to some West Ham fans, the name will already be familiar. To those who are not aware of who he is, if I were to tell you that he is, who he was and he still is, the driving force behind a successful German football club called Bayer Leverkusen, you would probably laugh in my face and tell me not to be so stupid because the world and his wife knows that the driving force and the success behind Leverkusen was indeed Tim Steidten. Well, was he? Look, if you're new to this channel, it's the first time you've come across the West Ham Voice. If you like the content, if you appreciate the content, then please do become a subscriber of the channel. And whether you are a subscriber or not, please do hit that like button. So let me tell you a little bit more about Simon Rolfes. He had a successful footballing career, making 377 appearances for Leverkusen, and scoring 49 goals as a defensive midfielder. He also represented the German national team, earning 26 caps. He retired from professional football in 2015, and then he transitioned into football management roles, first as head of youth and development at Bayer Leverkusen, and later as the club's sporting director. His leadership has been instrumental in assembling a talented squad that won the Bundesliga title just last season. Rolfes is highly respected in German football, and he has been linked to the recently vacated role at Arsenal. He is now currently the managing director of sport at Leverkusen. Did you get that? Not only is he linked with the role at Arsenal that was vacated by Edu, he is also credited with the success that Leverkusen have had. And as I said, you'd be thinking I'd be stupid because, we all thought that when Tim Steidten came to West Ham, he was clearly the man who was credited for having aided Leverkusen to the success that it's had. But the realization for many West Ham fans is it's kind of dawning on us now that Simon Rolfes, is and has been and still is the brains behind Leverkusen's success. Now, Rolf's first role after retiring, as I've mentioned, back in 2015, the first one was as academy manager. But within 5 months of that role, he was elevated to sporting director at the club. And Rolfes was part of the process for bringing Tim Steidten to Leverkusen. Steidten at the time was director of football at Werder Bremen, and he came to Leverkusen as head of scouting. Both men, they worked in tandem to attract talent at Leverkusen, who, apart from just one season in the past 10 years, have always maintained a top 6 finish in the Bundesliga. In 2022, Rolfes was promoted to his current role of managing director of sport, and Steidten looked to have been demoted in his role from head of scouting to sports coordinator. There was an apparent falling out between the two men, and reports at the time suggested that they didn't see eye to eye in the direction that the club should be heading. Within a year, as we know, Steidten became technical director at West Ham, and Leverkusen went on to win the Bundesliga in a season which saw them undefeated in the league, as well as reaching the final of the Europa League, where, of course, they played West Ham in a game where we almost became the first team last season to have beaten them in all competitions. Now, that would have been sweet justice for Steidten, but it was not meant to be. So why is this also significant to our current predicament at West Ham? Well, as I've mentioned, we all lauded Steidten as being the man who had not only brought success to Leverkusen, which we now seem to believe is not quite the case, but Steidten was meant to bring fortunes or turn fortunes around at West Ham as well. Now, I remember doing a show when Steidten first arrived at the club, suggesting that the most important signing that West Ham have had in recent times was Tim Steidten. I fell for this. I fell for the belief that he was going to bring something different to the club. And I've got to be honest, I'm disappointed to admit that I was wrong. But why do I think I'm wrong? Well, in the summer, Steidten seemed to express his delight at now having unhindered control of setting the direction of this football club. Steidten clearly won the battle at board level to change the setup from having a manager to having a head of coaching. And he was going to be now responsible for all transfers, where the coach was only going to be responsible for coaching the team. Now, when David Moyes said on the overlap recently that he was offered a contract, which was not a good one, before Sullivan withdrew it, we all knew that parts of the contract were likely to be that Moyes was not going to be in control of transfers. And clearly, Steidten had won the power battle there. But Steidten also brought in additional people to help him with this new transition of West Ham. The first of which was his brother, Moritz Steidten, who is now the head of international scouting and recruitment at West Ham. And the other person that he brought in was Max Hahn. And Max Hahn is known to be, he is the head of technical recruitment and analysis, and he's known to play quite a major role in identifying talent across the world through data-driven analysis. Now, with his background in data analysis, do we think that the sort of, and also Moritz Steidten's background in international scouting, do we think we've actually got the best players available during the transfer window through data-driven analysis and international scouting? I'm not so sure. We've got to look at the signings that we brought at West Ham over the summer. And we've also got to think about the position we're in. We've got to think about the way we're playing our football to maybe suggest that maybe the summer transfer window was not as successful as we all thought it was at the time. Now, I know many are going to say, hang on a minute, this isn't just down to Steidten, but more down to Lopetegui and his style of coaching. And I, for one, don't disagree with that at all. And then others are going to say, well, hang on a minute, this is all down to the board and Sullivan for opting to bring in a cheaper managerial or head coaching role when he could have done something different with Ruben Amorim, etc., etc. And to a point, I don't disagree altogether with that either. Now, to be honest with you, all three men have got to bear the brunt of responsibility for where West Ham are at this moment in time. It's quite possible that Sullivan could have appointed a more ambitious coach than we had. And we've got to look at Sullivan and what he did. Now, we look at the likes of Bournemouth, Brighton, Brentford, the three Bs, to see how things could indeed have been better. They've got managers or head coaches that are young, ambitious, look at things in a completely different way. And to be honest, none of the managers at those three clubs would have been beyond Sullivan's reach if he had the foresight to go out and get someone like Iralo, however you want to pronounce his name, or any of the other two managers at those three clubs. But Sullivan, as we know, is a pragmatic kind of person. And it will always lead to Sullivan recruiting a pragmatic kind of manager, or in this case, a head coach. We've only got to look at our history under the current ownership to realize this. Avram Grant's Premier League experience and a winner. Well, he was a winner with Maccabi Haifa and a runner-up in the Champions League with Chelsea, but clearly not with the team that he with the team that he inherited rather than the team that he built. Sam Allardyce, an abundance of Premier League experience, and absolutely the right man at the time to bring us back into the Premier League, albeit through the playoffs when we should have won the championship. But another pragmatic kind of manager. Slaven Bilic, well, another one with Premier League experience where he played in the league rather than managing, and a defender by trade, which is going to bring some level of pragmatism. But unfortunately, with Bilic, he tried to be a more attack-minded manager, and he kept forgetting that defending was a key part of the role as well. And then, of course, David Moyes, another one with an abundance of Premier League experience and probably one of the most pragmatic managers we've ever had at the club. I guess the only exception to the rule was when Sullivan hired Manuel Pellegrini, and we all know what happened there. So, does it come as any surprise then that Sullivan went for Steidten Lopetegui, who by and large is another pragmatic type of manager? No, I don't think so. And whilst many fans insist it was because of him being the cheapest option, which I'm sure there's an element to it, I would throw in the fact that Sullivan's instinct is to go for a pragmatic manager, hence the signing of Lopetegui. But on top of that, Lopetegui came with a similar kind of background to Pellegrini, a bit of a glamorous background, a winner, plus the modest small dose of Premier League experience with Wolves for half a season. And that's probably why Sullivan chose him. So that's Sullivan. But let's go back to Tim Steidten for a moment, because as I said, what we expected from Steidten in his approach, he was, brought to us as the pearl diver, and he was brought to us as the man that was going to use data-driven analysis to get the sort of players that we wanted. But that just hasn't materialized, has it really? It hasn't materialized in any of the signings that we brought in, or well, in most of them. Now, let's briefly mention some players who we got in the summer who, to a certain extent, are doing okay at West Ham, or maybe with Wes Foderingham as an aside, because he will only get game time if we have both goalkeepers injured. But I think others like Todibo, now, despite reservations of some fans, I think he's shown enough to demonstrate that he could become a top-class defender. I think Kilman, and I do wonder, where we'd be if without Kilman, because he's been extremely solid. And then, of course, Aaron Wan-Bissaka, who is still one of the best right backs in the Premier League, and I guess is simply being misused by Lopetegui more than his inability to defend. And then, of course, there's Crescencio Somerville, who continues to demonstrate just how talented he also is in the league as well. Now, if you're interested in winning a signed and framed Crescencio Somerville shirt, plus the chance to win 15 instant West Ham prizes, do go to footballprizes.co.uk for all the latest details. Terms and conditions apply, and the best of luck if you do enter. So, what about some of the players that haven't been quite successful at West Ham so far this season? I guess you got to look at Luis Guilherme, who was, I guess, in a kind of way, is meant to be the Steidten pearl find. But at 20 odd million pounds, I'm not so sure that's the way you approach a pearl find. A pearl find is going to be someone that comes in relatively cheap and probably ends up being a 50, 60, 70 million pound footballer. Now, it's possible that Guilherme could well become that kind of player who could well become the next big deal in football, but we're not seeing much of that at this moment in time. And then you've got to look at the likes of Guido Rodriguez. Steidten is actually known for not only finding young up-and-coming players, but also for bringing in older, experienced footballers as well. And I guess we can all agree that the Argentine and the Premier League are not a well-suited match. Now, Rodriguez is apparently unhappy at West Ham. He's not settling in. And you could actually see him plying his trade in maybe the Italian league or the Spanish league, and he'll prove to be really successful there, just as Naif Agurd has proved and is in his loan spell at Real Sociedad. Because the pace in Spanish football and more probably in Italian football will ideally suit Rodriguez. And with the latest story suggesting that he's unsettled, it won't surprise me at all if we actually see Rodriguez either loaned out or sold in the coming January transfer window in order to raise some funds for bringing in a very different type of central midfielder to West Ham. Then you've got to look at Carlos Soler. Again, Steidten is known for picking out players who are not doing decent players, good players who are not doing so well at their current clubs and picking them out and bringing them to another club to sort of resurrect their careers. Don't know if Soler needed his career to be resurrected, but you get what I mean. You know, the idea was that Soler was probably going to have more game time and demonstrate to PSG what they're missing by benching him all the time. But that hasn't worked out either. And Soler looks like another player that doesn't quite fit in to what we need at West Ham. And then, of course, you've got to mention Nicholas Füllkrug, who is also apparently unsettled at West Ham and is thought to be probably one of the worst signings that we've had at the club for quite a long time. Whatever we paid for him, 20 odd million plus whatever add-ons leading to 27 million pounds, you've got to say that it was pretty much a poor decision to bring Füllkrug in. Now, there are other things that are going on with Füllkrug. I'm going to do a separate little show about that. Apparently, his injury could be a lot worse than we anticipated, but I'll get to that in a separate show in the next day or so. So when you look at the ensemble of players that have come in, this is not a pearl diving. This is not a data-driven analysis transfer window that we thought was going to be. So we've covered Sullivan and his pragmatic approach to bringing in pragmatic managers. We have looked at Steidten and the fact that he is barely using his pearl finding skills nor his data-driven analysis to bring in the right kind of players for West Ham. Not to mention that the success, as I've already said, at Leverkusen is more likely to have been down to Simon Rolfes rather than Steidten. And then we've also got to finally look at Steidten Lopetegui and his coaching style. It's now more than a week or so since the 0-0 ball draw against Everton, and everybody thought that Lopetegui was going to be sacked, but he's still here. And as I said in last week's show, he's kind of going to now be limping his way from one game to another in the hope that we'll get a draw here or a win there in order to see him through to the next game. My guess is that it's going to take a major defeat, an absolute thrashing for Lopetegui to lose his job. Now, that could come against Newcastle. It may come against Arsenal, but it's going to come. And if it does, then I would suggest that that will be the last stand for Steidten Lopetegui at West Ham. Now, Lopetegui has alluded to not having the right kind of players to execute the style of play that he wants at West Ham. And this is why my ears are ringing as to maybe having, if he lasts this long, maybe more changes in the January transfer window, whereas I've already suggested the likes of Rodriguez may leave West Ham. You might see Soler's role being sent back to PSG in order to free up money in transfers and in salaries in order to bring in the players that Lopetegui may think are going to be more suited to West Ham, to the way he wants West Ham to play football. But Lopetegui has also got to get the best out of the players that are currently afforded to him, because I don't think he will last as long as the January transfer window if he doesn't change his style. I agree with many pundits and fans who say he doesn't really know his best team. And that fits in with the narrative of not having, or for his narrative of not having the right players at his disposal. So he's using just about every player available to him to see if they can fit into the style of football that he wants West Ham to play. But there are some things that Lopetegui can change straight away if he wants West Ham to be more successful on the pitch. First is to stop playing the high line, as it doesn't suit our defenders, nor does it suit the midfield that we currently have. If we venture into the transfer market in January to get better central combative midfielders, then maybe you go back to that high line afterwards. Our players at this moment in time simply cannot keep up with the pressure that they're put under by playing such a high line. And linked to that is the use of our fullbacks. Now, I've already said Aaron Wan-Bissaka is regarded to be one of the best right backs in the Premier League, but he's looking awful at the moment because he's been encouraged to go higher up the pitch. So is Emerson on the other side. He's being encouraged to go so far high up the pitch that when we lose the ball, he doesn't have the energy to actually get back in position. People are calling him lazy, and some people will suggest to, well, look at Crescencio Somerville when he ran the full length of the pitch to stop Everton from scoring, and shouldn't Aaron Wan-Bissaka be doing the same thing? Yes, to a point, but he's exerting all his energy going down, trying to attack, and he's probably got not much left in him when he's got to run back to defend. Now, the irony with West Ham, well, I mean, that's what we've got to do. We've got to. I'm not suggesting that we should go back to a Moyes low block, but we can play that mid block a little bit like Nottingham Forest are doing, and they're having an awful lot of success. But then what Nottingham Forest are doing is they're hitting teams on the counter attack, and I think that's another thing that Lopetegui should go back to doing. He should sacrifice this possession-based football that's not reaping too much reward, and potentially go back to a counter-attacking style of football. That way, he'll get the best out of the players that are currently available to him, such as the likes of Jared Bowen and Mohamed Kudus, who thrived on the counter-attack in previous seasons. Now, the irony of all this is we've never had an issue scoring goals in previous years. We've always had an issue like we can't stop goals being scored against us. But now the issue we have is we're not only not able to score goals because of the style of football that we're playing, but we're also still conceding many goals as well. Now, Lopetegui, I believe, he's got to prove himself in the type of coach that he is, because he does have the resources available to him to make us a better team on the pitch. He's got to use those resources in the right way. If he doesn't, he will be leaving West Ham United sooner rather than later. And to be quite honest with you, it won't surprise me one bit if Steidten follows him out the door. Watch this space. Like I said, if you're new to the channel, if you've enjoyed the content, please do hit the like button, and please become a subscriber. Or even if you're an existing subscriber, don't forget to hit that like button. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for listening. I'll be back again with the West Ham Weekly on Monday night, and I'll see you all very soon.